Здравейте, драги зрители! If you were asked which of the Emperor's sons had suffered the most, which among the thousands he uplifted were the most mistreated, which of his children lost the most, surely one clear answer must be coming to mind. Sit your ass down, this isn't about you! Though, if that was your guess, it isn't far from what I was alluding to. If anything, you could argue that the calamitous amount of misfortune this specific group went through is karmic justice for what they did to the Thunder Warriors. I am, of course, referring to the Firstborn Space Marines, or better known as the Terranborn, the literal very first Astartes made by the Emperor who finished the conquest of Terra, aided in bringing the last of their prototype kin to peace, and set off into the void to bring the stars under the rightful rule of the Master of Mankind. Before any Primarch came into the scene, these warriors were humanity's greatest. However, as it happens with basically everything else when the gene sires of the legions get involved, the spotlight abandons the Terran-born Astartes rather quickly, returning mainly to show their great moments of suffering, be it fending off enemies in a last stand, getting integrated along with the future ranks of their legions to the point where their original culture is practically erased, or being culled in betrayal. For that last one, you'd be correct to think of Istvan III, where the traitor legions purged their loyalist elements, a large majority of which were the Terran-born, but that was far from the first time that they had been betrayed, since the bastard Corax practically exterminated all of the 19th's Terran-born by sending them on the most lethal missions the Legion needed to undertake. But this video is not meant to cover his detestable hypocrisy, so I shall move on. The point is that their numbers are severely depleted by the time the Horus Heresy rolls around, or even earlier than that in some cases, rendering them on the verge of extinction, which robs us of their outlook on things. That is what I wish to explore in this video's narrative, since I feel it is not as prominently represented in the lore as I would like it to be. Yes, there are quite a few brilliant characters that hail from the throne world, like Azek Ahriman, Nathaniel Garrow, Fabius Bile, and the literally him, Sigismund. But nearly all of them are too well assimilated into their legions after reuniting with their Primarchs, and don't really give a perspective of someone who was separate in his heritage from the other Marines. How did they feel about their fathers, their new brothers, and the homeworlds that molded them, for example? I hope that I have managed to capture this particular sensation in the coming tale, and that you will find it enjoyable. Very quickly before proceeding to it, please subscribe to the channel for future videos. And remember to vote on the poll found in my community tab to determine the order of the next 3 months' content. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, sit back and come along into the mind of an old man. Blissfully, the order to end the pretend barrage and withdraw finally came. Voimir had had enough of this worthless world, and even more of mincing reports in front of the brick stackers. Both of those, however, offered insignificant respite in the face of his greatest gripe, the same reason that had delayed their departure. The Primarch's deluded desire to bring the faulty ones to justice. His helmet preserved the ship's floor from the touch of his acidic spit, its ever-present vigil dissuading Voimir from indulging in the compulsion at the thought. With but an order, he and a handful of his few remaining Terran-born brothers would not only bring adequate sanction to those breaching appropriate conduct, but cleanse and restore the Legion to proper form. Pain flickered in his mind this time, an unnecessary distinction, as he refused to acknowledge almost all, save a few, of the Nostroman filth as his kin. Despite doing it himself, the deranged lunatic that was their gene sire would never take the necessary steps to rid the 8th of its infection. Always blinded by his accursed visions and the stupor following them. Voimir hated how well he had been crafted, as the compulsion to obey his progenitor, despite his detest of him, was strongly rooted. Even more, he hated that last microscopic shred of humanity that still lingered deep in him. The little voice that urged him to watch out for his own hide, which grew stronger with the untimely deaths of every other true brother he lost. It had become the one voice that he could not tune out. Whatever affliction the Night Haunter carried had spread among their ranks in different aspects. That one apothecary from the 10th Company, one of the madman's favorites, also had visions, brought upon with crippling pain. In Voimir's case, it was significantly more subtle. For whatever reason, he had been cursed with the talent to perceive and know the emotions of those around him. Empath. He recalled the word that the Thousand Son who briefly served among them had used during his lectures to their librarius. An awful word. Whatever hope he may have had for the rest of the Midnight Clad to improve died once he began involuntarily peering into their natures. No matter if they kept up appearances and did their best to follow Kurz's guidelines, deep down, nearly all the Legion was rotten. It sickened him to know that the Knight's children were practically extinct by now. Though definitely a curse, Voimir could not deny that what he had was a talent, which was precisely why he kept it as a secret to himself. When he focused on a single individual, from their emotional state he could read them like a book, predicting any move they would make well in advance of their body manifesting the thought. If it came down to it, he believed he would be able to dispose of anyone among the Eighth, bar maybe some of the Atramentar, and Sevatar, that despicable crow. While he respected, hell, even admired the first captain's prowess, Voimir held particular loathing for him. Evidently he was able to overcome his gene-coded loyalty, able to actually talk back to the Night Haunter, and would have been able to return their legion to glory. Yet he did none of that, satisfying himself with just acting like the obedient hound for a fool. An unfitting word. In the single instance where his curiosity got the better of him, Voimir tried to glean the nature of the Primarch. What he found was nothing but a mangled mess of a creature, fit only to be restrained in a padded room, let alone be given command over a necessary weapon like the Eighth. The memory of the madness was banished by a whiff of something curiously unusual approaching the juncture he was about to pass. Concern, mixed with shame. Both emanated out of Shenzak Tharth, one of the few Nostramans worthy enough to be acknowledged as a brother. Out of courtesy, Voimir cleared his throat as he walked into his field of view and asked,
"What happened down there?"
A sigh was the first response that came out of the younger Astartes, followed by a shake of his head that preceded his words. "We found father. He had fallen upon several who had strayed, butchered them, and destroyed their gene seed." Futile and wasteful. Voimir did not voice the thought.
"So, it is not the first time he has done this. Why do you sound like you were nearly sentenced to mercy and forgiveness?"
Involuntarily, Shenzak glanced down at his red-stained hands as he answered, "We got ambushed by the Raven Guard and their Primarch. Somehow, they had become one with the shadows. Not even the enhancement of prey sight could reveal them until they chose to show themselves." His fists clenched. "All of us, including Jago, were at their mercy, except for father. Yet, despite having noticed them, he did nothing." The little spark of ire that the Terran was nursing flared up at the mention of their supposed mirror betters, but was quickly suppressed by the understanding of what had caused Shenzak's mood. "However, I still do not understand his words to the first captain after the 19th had left. Now is not the time for us to kill our brethren." Carefully, Tharth's hands bloomed again, rose up, and removed his helmet. "What do you make of that, old man?" he cautiously uttered. Initially, Voimir's face partially turned away, before he mirrored his brother's gesture and revealed his features as well. At a glance, one could easily mistake them as genuine kin, but upon closer inspection, preferably with better lighting, the subtle differences could be noted. Shenzak was a true Nightworlder, milky pale and his eyes devoured by his pupils. Opposite of him, the Terran, while also pale, still had some life showing upon his skin, and due to only being born in darkness rather than adapted to it, his own eyes had notably less black in them, confined in a thin ring of hazel that was his receded iris, visible only when directly illuminated. Their gazes studied the other for scant heartbeats before Voimir gave his opinion.
"They may parade and pomp, claiming to be superior. But the fact of the matter is that there is little difference between us and the Ravens. Murdering criminal bastards, there are a lot of them, including their feather-minded father. Exactly the same as a lot of the legions. Exactly the same as the scum curse dispenses justice upon. I wouldn't be surprised if he believes we should impose law upon them. The only thing we can hope for is that he isn't mad enough to initiate hostility against them without the Emperor's blessing.
Tharth laughed dryly, bereft of mirth. You still kindle hope, brother. The thing to which we are anathema. How do you do it?
I don't.
The Terran flatly stated.
I simply don't care.
He lied, re-equipping his helm and walking off. By that point, the Nostraman's internal conflict had grown too tumultuous for Voimir to absorb, so he tuned it out as his mind processed the other words he would not voice. His concealed truth that he did not care about those cousins that were practically their equals, harboring hate only for those that were lesser but grew greater because their own sires were not poison to their legion. Treason is a difficult mantle to embrace. Had it occurred near the Great Crusade's beginning, it would have been unthinkable. Yet, after enduring what was practically the agonizing decay and death of his brothers and order, little protest remained in the Terran's mind, coming to believe that they were the first to be betrayed by having the colossal vermin appointed as their leader. A belief solidified by the delight of seeing cursed Nostramo's destruction. Ironically, this seductive resignation of duty rewarded Voimir and his remaining kin plentifully. Upon the dust of Istvan, they put the haughty ravens in their place, whilst also gaining splendorous war gear from those self-righteous salamanders, where Voimir claimed himself a new Thunderhammer. Even better, among the fires of Thramas, the fetid Night Haunter and his pet crow were lost to the First Legion. Lamentably, the ingrate Scrivok managed to usurp command. Yet the Terran did not worry, for he was certain that the Cretan would meet his end during the homecoming to the throne world. And so it would be, against the true target of Voimir's envious contempt, the former Revenants, now ascended as angels. However, he failed to foresee that it would not be a singular occurrence. Drunk on vengeful success, he had forgotten one important fact. The sons of Sanguinius were nothing like those of Corax. The Eighth were the first to strike upon the walls of the Imperial Palace, but the zeal of their assault was almost immediately blunted by the Ninth. Fervor withered to disappointment, which quickly spiked to frustration, enhanced by each of his praetorianship falling one after the other. Hatred was sinking its claws deep within his veins, until its miasma was temporarily banished by a thunderbolt of a message. "The Fourth are quitting the siege!" Curses spewed forth from Voimir's mind, as he fought to rally what forces remained under his command for a withdrawal. All memory of how long they had spent fending the Blood Angels off was lost to him by the time a Thunderhawk could reach them. Its roaring engines promised salvation, but it would not find them. In the middle of its flight, an explosion shook the craft. Barely hesitating, the Terran hammered its side open and flew out on his own, expecting the rest of the squad to follow on their own jump packs. This hope was destroyed the moment he turned around, seeing only how the ship plummeted down and the few Astartes that had left it were swarmed by red airborne predators. From within the melee, a streak of gold caught his attention before it rammed into him, tackling them both down to the ground. With a blind kick and elbow strike, he barely managed to get the assailant off of himself, just in time to land safely, cracking the surface of whatever constituted the ground. 3 heartbeats was all the time Voimir could afford to perceive the impassive, golden features of Sanguinius himself, before the sanguinary guard surged forward with his crackling power spear. Beset by a sudden flurry of strikes that he could barely evade or parry with the more cumbersome weapon in his hands, the Terran struggled to focus. All he needed to do was attune to his opponent's emotional state to be able to read his moves before they took place in order to win. Yet with each passing moment, that became little better than a fleeting dream. A connection had been made, but he could not get any kind of read on the Gilded One's moves. No kindling to stroke, no concern to trip up, only determined resolve and disciplined intent to kill. The only thing his prey would feel would be the bite of his weapon as the spear found gaps in the Night Lord's defenses, leaving melted gashes in his ceramite, but never quite breaking through to the flesh underneath. Attack had turned into a myth, banished by the need to preserve his life. Reaching its bursting point, Voimir's frustration bellowed forth in a single word.
How?
Because it left him open for an instant too long, in the span of which the Sanguinary Guard whirled forward after a parry, assisted by his own jump pack, landing a kick into the midnight-clad helmet's side, shattering most of it into fragments of ceramite and sending its wearer to the ground, head somehow still attached to his shoulders. That was it, Voimir thought. This is where he would die. Unmourned, useless, hated, a betrayer. A brief wonder of whether the spear or the angel's boot would be the ones to claim him crossed his mind. Instead of either one coming, however, the ringing of his head dissipated from the terrible scream of pain that tore itself out of his opponent. Mustering his remaining strength, the Terran rolled away and forced himself up to his feet, hurrying to bring oxygen back into his system. Meanwhile, the Sanguinary Guard had stumbled back, also breathing heavily, as if nursing a strike more severe than the one he had delivered. The most concerning thing, however, revealed itself to the Night Lord's psychic gift. Rage. Unimaginable rage swelled from within the Golden Warrior, like a black void that swallowed all brightness and reason from him, culminating in his crimson glare returning to the Praetor as he growled out, "Horus!" Confusion was forced to wait as the Gilded Killer lunged forward with renewed vigor. Every thrust, punch, and kick that he dispensed would have killed Voimir on the spot, were it not for the price this strength had demanded. Whatever the cause of this increased lethality, it had removed any and all subtlety from its wielder, making his attacks more deadly but blindingly telegraphed. Doubly so now that there was so much raw emotion that Voimir could read. After risking several closer-than-advisable dodges, he dove under an incoming swipe of the spear and jumped into the air on a flaming plume. Immediately, the Sanguinary Guard followed, rising high like a sun, then dove, intending to spear his opponent from above. That was the foreseen opening. Deftly, the Praetor whirled his body, rolling past and up the spear's shaft, burying the crackling thunderhammer into the angel's chest and slamming his body back into the ground. Even heavier breaths of disbelief at his success escaped between his lips as he looked upon the fallen warrior. Ceramite and bone ravaged, blood fountaining over the ruined gold, its bearer unmoving. Carefully, he stood up and continued heaving air for several moments, as if making sure that his kill was genuine, until he finally voiced his own rage.
Ow!
The word nearly tore out his throat like a howl.
How? How did you ascend?
His surging adrenaline caused him to begin menacingly pacing up and down the length of the gilded corpse, while his ragged breathing fought for existence alongside his manic words.
You were the scum of the legions. We, the Night Children, were your betters. We were the necessary evil. You were the corpse eaters. Mutant to rubble, worse than what the poison of Nostramo turned the Eighth into, fate only for extinction! Even now, your true nature revealed itself to be your undoing. How did you ascend to be his favorite? If I am to die a demon of the night, then I demand that you answer me, angel. How?
This final howl stilled Voimir's pacing, looming over his cousin's head and lifting the crackling thunderhammer high above, in preparation to obliterate the silent, unflinching, angelic visage that glared up at him. Something about that face, the placid impassivity it radiated, made the Night Lord halt for several tense moments. During their duration, in between his breaths, an urge began to rise within his core. Unusual, but not unfamiliar, as he had seen it take place in others more times than he deemed worthy of existing. Normally, any such sensation would be immediately quashed, but by this point he could no longer care. The only thing that occupied his rationale was a demand for knowledge.
Fine, then.
The Drake-like hammer felt freedom as its power field shut off. Its heft slid out of its thieve's hands, and its head ruptured the ground where it landed.
I will answer myself.
In a near instant, Voimir's claws sank around the corpse's neck, and with a single tug, the head was liberated from its shattered frame. Hungrily, almost desperate in his haste, the murderer dug his victim's head out of the helmet and sank his teeth into its dripping gore. Amidst the grisly display, his body would suddenly freeze from the black torrent of rage that now engulfed him. Overwhelmed, Voimir was initially barred vision into anything and was brought down to his knees until the gleaming light of knowledge pierced him. It came bearing the form of the rage's source, a dead Primarch's visage. And within its burning eyes, the Child of Night saw the grim duty his fallen cousin had fulfilled before donning his shattered golden coffin, which was the Angel's shame.
You had sins of your own, I see. But you had no Night Hunter, no Crow Prince to enable his madness and prevent the rot from being cleansed.
Another mirthless chuckle escaped him as he set the head back where it ought to have belonged, with as much respect and dignity as was possible given the circumstances. Then stood up, picking up the Orm helmet.
Both of us will die as orphans, cousin. But you can rest in peace, for you at least got to have an actual father. Me, my birthman was lost to the dark long before I could know him. The one who raised me I betrayed, and he could be dying at his damn son's close as we speak.
The faint smirk that had crept on Voimir's face died, replaced by a grimmer visage.
And the Nostraman mongrel dog was never one to begin with. If only we were not made to be so loyal and loving of our gene sires. Hopefully I don't have to see him ever again.
Surprisingly, the vox of his helmet had survived, announcing its life with the voice of Shenzak Tharth, accompanied by weapons fire.
Voimir! Knight, take those bastards! Are you still alive? The siege is lost. We must abscond now if we are to survive.
For a dozen heartbeats, no response was given. Instead, the Night Child looked down at the sanguinary guard. No malice existed in his own eyes, nor anything demeaning like pity or remorse. Only a placid compersion which smothered any specks of envy that originally arose within his hearts. Wordlessly, he finally took up his stolen weapon and turned to leave.
I still breathe, yes. Send me your coordinates for rendezvous.
Igniting his jump pack and leaving the scene of his crime. Tragedy and struggle supplanted what little catharsis had bloomed at the heresy's beginning post-haste. Dwindling ever further, their numbers were scythed down in the fires of the Scouring and the ambush of the Eldar when the Soul Hunter sought to prey upon the Night Haunter's assassin. Learning that Kurz had lived soured Voimir's already bleak demeanor greatly, but thankfully that was a problem that corrected itself not long after. The scramble for his middling artifacts was beyond expected, but he never imagined that Zhou Sahal, one of his few remaining Terran brothers, would reveal himself as a fleeing thief. In the end, it did not matter. He reasoned in grieving silence, while observing the congregation his rank had admitted him to. The 10th and many other companies had already broken off and made their separate ways into the void, be it to follow the madman's command to bleed the wounded Imperium, or to simply satisfy their own vices. Present within the hall were the handful of captains and sergeants whose forces were too small to meaningfully survive on their own, with minor bodyguard escorts. Disgruntlement, hollowness, and even sorrow, amusingly enough, seeped out of most of them. Voimir may have found the entire defeatist scene amusing if it was not for the two pollutants spreading their toxins into the room, survivors of Scrivox cadre.
Clearly, you all should swear fealty to me. My warband already matches the numbers of everyone here put together, preserved by my leadership. With our combined might, we could easily establish our own holding in the neighboring systems, one peacocked. You were rearguard, and the first to abscond from Terra, the other accused. That is why your numbers were sustained. I was Scrivox's favored lieutenant, which is why my claws accompanied his at the walls. Inductii chaff was all we sacrificed. My veteran corps remains, and we can force obedience if we wanted to, but that would be a foolish waste of father's blood. The haughty invocation of the Primarch earned him multiple glares, which then doubled after his next words. Instead of trying to hold ground, we should simply cut a swath through the withering Imperium's belly and trade carnage, slaughter, and worship for the blessings of the ruinous powers.
And so they argued, practically losing themselves to each other's gibberish. Oh, how he yearned to just shut them off. But he could not, as he was also sampling the emotions of one other, a simmering hatred that some of the others present, who bore no psychic curse, could probably also feel. Shenzak. Through the drudgery of the situation, Voimir was about to put a hand on his brother's shoulder, intending to counsel him against wasting wrath on the idiotic pair, but it would be too late. Within mere heartbeats, the Nostroman pulled up his plasma pistol and melted the pirate's head off of his shoulders, then tackled the cultist to the ground and began to mercilessly pommel him, denting the floor's plating. Few among the gathered adjusted their bodies to step forward, but halted when they noticed the others. None of them would dare make a move and give an opening. Recovering from the surprise attack, the scum tried fighting back, spitting out a mouthful of acid, but Tarth blocked it with his hand, which he then drove into his prey's skull. Only his labored breathing filled the room as he stood up. With a single turn of his head, his eyes went over the other officers as he spoke. "Riches? Blessings? Those are nothing but lies, no different than the chains the false emperor or his damned son gave us. We and our Primarch were nothing but tools to them, and the scum." His formerly red hand, now stripped to shining silver by the acid, pointed towards the dead pair at his feet. "Fit only to be discarded when we outlive our use. Well, I refuse to wear another chain." His finger now clanged against his armored chest. "Our father, condemned by this forsaken universe, gave unto us one purpose, to be vengeance incarnate. That is what I, and those who choose to follow me, will become. Not merely to the loyalists. No, we will claim our bloody retribution from every single cur that wronged the Primarch and the Legion. No matter how long it takes, no matter how sick our methods, through arms, poison, deceit, and whatever else it takes, we will see all of our enemies dead. The Golden Throne and its slaves, Horus' accursed progeny and those that fell alongside him, the corruptive devils they worship, any man or alien that gets in our way, and especially the filth daring to walk about clad in midnight who made us fall to ruin. They will all die as we rebuild the 8th as it should have been. Strong." He looked down at his hands, grimacing at the remaining red one. Violently, he spat his own acid upon it, letting it sizzle and linger until both of his gauntlets were like gleaming silver. "And pure." Shenzak looked back at his audience. "Who among you will stand with me?" Deafening silence gripped the room for nearly a solid minute before a sergeant decided to step forward, extending a hand towards the captain. The rest would never know if he would have taken it, as Voimir's stolen hammer struck the sergeant's midsection, ripping his body in two and letting the combat knife he had concealed in his other hand to clamber on the floor. Everyone else shared momentary glimpses of consideration. Then, one after the other, they swore their loyalty, what little was left of it, to Shenzak's banner, until finally the Terran gave his own oath.
"I swear to you, brother, I will ensure that the 8's purity will never again falter."
That earned him a smile from his now captain, who shook his hand before lifting it and declaring, "The law of the night above all else!" A phrase that the rest of their now warband began to chant, growing ever more zealous. The knight's children were dead. Any ties to a past life were dead. But despite it all, Voimir managed a thin smile, swearing to himself to avenge them all, as he should have done long ago, even if it was technically in the name of the debased beast whose blood he carried, like Shenzak had said, whatever it takes. Thus, solemnly, he donned the modified angelic visage that was his trophy and repeated their order's promise.
Lex, Noctis, Super Omnia.
A tad longer than normal, and hopefully worthy of your favor, because the warband whose birth we just witnessed is likely to make return appearances in the future. Or, maybe, it has even appeared in the past delusional tales already. Them aside, do you know of any other Terran-born Astartes, be they loyalist or traitor, whose stories captivated you? Please feel free to share, as I would love to read about them in the comments below. After that, you can head to the community tab and give your vote for the order of the upcoming content themes. Death Guard seem to be in a solid lead, but who knows how things turn out by the end of the month. However they may get lined up, do look forward to what is being cooked up. For now, I would really appreciate it if you smashed that like button and check out another video that may be of interest to you on the channel. Also, I'd like to give a very special thanks to RadiantGust for his phenomenal voice work as Voimir in this video. Until next time, I wish you a lovely rest of your day. Do viždene.